When prospective students visit UCL, they are brought to see Jeremy Bentham, who sits in his box very serenely in the south cloisters of the college. They are told 3 facts about Bentham. First, Bentham was the founder of UCL. Second, he left his body to the college. And third, his head was used as a football and so is no longer fit to be put on display. But who was Jeremy Bentham? Bentham was born in 1748 in London. He lived to the ripe old age of 84. He died in 1832 just as the Great Reform Act was passing. Bentham was the founder of the modern doctrine of utilitarianism, that the greatest happiness of the greatest number was the right and proper end of action. Happiness was cashed out in terms of pains and pleasures. And so when you start to add up the amount of pleasure which a person's experiencing and offset that against the pain, you come to the modern doctrine of cost-benefit analysis, which so dominates economics. Bentham's also been extremely influential in legal thought, for instance in his theory of evidence, in his views on codification, and in his general philosophy of law. Bentham developed a systematic theory of punishment which stressed deterrence and rehabilitation rather than revenge. In politics, he was the first advocate from a utilitarian perspective of equality. He even advocated women's suffrage as early as 1789. And later in life, in his magisterial constitutional code, he developed a blueprint for representative democracy, with a stress on openness and publicity in government. And perhaps most well known of all is the Panopticon prison scheme. This Bentham developed with his brother Samuel Bentham, a famous naval architect, whereby the governor in the centre of the prison could monitor all the activities of the inmates, and this could be transferred to other institutions where central inspection was necessary. These were some of the extraordinary achievements of Jeremy Bentham. That Bentham was the founder of UCL seems to be confirmed by this imposing painting, which is located under the dome of the Wilkins building, which was once the main entrance to the college. The painting was executed by William Tonks, the Slade professor, in 1922. It's entitled The Founders of University College. Kneeling on the right is the architect, William Wilkins. Next to him is Thomas Campbell, the poet, who first formally proposed the establishment of the university. On the other side is Henry Broome, the future Lord Chancellor, one of the main movers in the foundation of the college, and the diarist Henry Crabb Robinson. They are all looking on anxiously as Bentham approves the plans for the college. I think it would have been a great disappointment to them if he had disapproved, given that, as we can see in the background, that the portico of the college is already constructed. Well, I'm afraid that scene is imagined. Bentham never met the architect, and he never, as far as we know, came to visit the college. Did Bentham donate his body to UCL? Well, I'm afraid that's a myth as well. Thomas Southwood Smith, the surgeon who created the auto-icon, actually had the auto-icon living in his house for many years. It was only in March 1850 when Southwood Smith moved to a smaller house and decided he no longer had room for his non-paying lodger that he gave the auto-icon to the college. Now, what about the claim that Bentham's head was used as a football? I think this is the least plausible of the claims. The head would not have bounced very well. But at least we can investigate it by taking a look at the head itself.
There's a myth that students borrowed the head for football practice in the front quad. I think if you look at it with all its tiny hairs, it's incredibly fragile. The hairs on the head come off if you even move the head. I don't conceive that anybody could have thought it possible to kick it around. And if they had, it wouldn't look like it does today. It's simply too fragile. The desiccation process involved drawing sulfuric acid vapours over the head, and that resulted in not just the fatty tissue being dried out, so hence its rather shrunken appearance, but also in the discoloration of the skin, which gives it this, to our eyes anyway, rather florid red colour. Originally it was taken off display because it was found shocking. We do now have a policy on how we care for human remains at UCL, and when Bentham died he clearly wanted his head to be on at least semi-public view. He couldn't have known how the process would turn out, and shortly after his death it was decided to replace his head with a wax portrait. And so the people who knew him presumably concluded that the head wasn't to be on display.
Bentham lived in London for the vast majority of his life. He was born in Houndsditch and then sent as a boarder to Westminster School. At the tender age of 12, the young Jeremy began his university education at Queen's College, Oxford. He was supposedly the youngest person ever to have been admitted to Oxford up to that time. One of the defining moments of his life occurred in 1765, when he was forced to subscribe to the 39 Articles of the Church of England in order to take his degree. This was the most notable occasion, perhaps the only occasion, on which he was forced to compromise his intellectual integrity. He realised that not to subscribe would have dashed the hopes of his father Jeremiah, who hoped that his son would not only follow his own footsteps into a career in the law, but would become Lord Chancellor of England. Bentham's next move was to rooms here in Lincoln's Inn. At the age of 21, in 1769, he qualified as a barrister. But he decided that instead of practising law, for which he soon gained a very healthy contempt, he would devote himself to reforming it. He wouldn't become Lord Chancellor in the way that his father had wished. So he sat down and he started writing his works on jurisprudence, and in particular his first magnum opus, a penal code. But as he went on, he wrote more and more and more. The work just expanded and expanded and expanded. Bentham's family house was in what was then called Queen Square Place, and when Bentham's father died in 1792, Bentham inherited the house and moved in. The site is now occupied, perhaps ironically enough, by the Ministry of Justice. Bentham was living here in the centre of the British Empire and of course was very interested in politics. In 1793 he even got Parliament to pass an act permitting him to build his Panopticon prison, but he became so frustrated at the lack of progress that it drove him to political radicalism, and in 1809 he started writing on parliamentary reform. As he got older he got more and more radical, and by the time he finished his career he was advocating representative democracy. He wanted to abolish the monarchy and the aristocracy and establish himself instead a single chamber, annually elected representative assembly. In the 1820s, when the radicals and reformers were establishing the University of London, which became UCL, were they not at least influenced by Bentham's ideas? Bentham himself had very little practical involvement in the establishment of the university. He did spend £100 buying a share in the new establishment, but then so did over 1,000 other people. Bentham tried to persuade Henry Broome to appoint John Bowring, Bentham's disciple, to the chair of English literature and possibly as a secretary of foreign correspondence. This was in 1827. Broome, however, declined to appoint Bowring. Bentham became upset about the way in which Broome and James Mill were going about things.
The aristocratically close conduct pursued by you in conjunction with Mr. Mill in the management of that concern, the University of London, has all along appeared to me to be in the teeth of those democratical principles of mine which are in print, and which have, on all occasions on which he has been impartial, been approved of by Mr. Mill.
Bentham complained that on the 19th of December 1825, Broome and Mill had manipulated the elections to the first college council. Broome responded that if the proprietors had been left to themselves, they would have elected a whole host of inappropriate persons. But at least one Benthamite landed a chair. John Austin was appointed as the first professor of jurisprudence. Having said that, Bentham does have a claim to be the founder of UCL, or at least its spiritual founder, though Bentham would not have approved the words of spiritual, giving his religious views. In 1817, Bentham wrote a treatise called Chrestomathea, which was aimed at the middling and higher classes and wanted to provide for them a useful education. That's what Chrestomathea means. And the first historian of University College London, H.L. Bellot, thought that Bentham's ideas in Chrestomathea were a forecast for the University of London.
A forecast of the University of London. The school was to serve the middling classes. It was to be launched by a body of shareholders in a joint stock company. It was to be cheap and in the end self-supporting. By virtue of being non-residential, it was to be free from the embarrassing obligation to provide religious teaching. It was to attend to useful and not merely to ornamental instruction. And it was therefore to educate its pupils in a great variety of subjects not at that date commonly recognised as part even of a university curriculum. In spite of the strange jargon with which it is hedged about, no reader of the Chrestomathea can fail to perceive in it a gleam of extraordinary freshness.
For Bentham, the point was to divorce religion from education, just as it was to divorce religion from legislation. And it was this reforming yet tolerant secularism which was at the basis of his thought and also at the basis of the foundation of UCL. Now, the Church of England responded by founding King's College, and a contemporary radical cartoon gives a flavour of how the foundation of King's was perceived by the radicals. At the top of the seesaw is Bentham and his friends and disciples, with all their books of sense and science being outweighed by the fat bishops, weighed down by money, who are about to slide off the other end of the seesaw into eternal damnation. Now, there is another story told about Bentham and UCL, and this is that Bentham attends meetings of the college council, and that it's recorded in the minutes that Mr. Bentham is present but not voting. Now, surely Bentham doesn't attend meetings of the college council. Well, he did once. He attended the meeting held on the 150th anniversary of the founding of the college on the 10th of February 1976. It's recorded in the minutes, Mr. Jeremy Bentham present but not voting. After Bentham's death, and according to instructions left in his will, around 24 of his friends, relatives and employees were presented with a mourning ring. This is one of those rings. The rings were made in 1822. The silhouette was painted by John Field. On the reverse there is a plait of Bentham's hair. Each of the rings was inscribed with the name of the recipient. This particular ring was given to John Stuart Mill. Mr. Michael Phillips, an alumni of the law faculty and fellow of the college, spotted the ring in a shop in New Orleans, bought it and donated it to the college. Both from the point of view of historical importance and contemporary significance, Bentham is an immense figure. But instead of the question, what did Bentham do for UCL? We can ask, well, what is UCL doing for Bentham? Well, UCL is supporting the new edition of Bentham's writings. And it's not because of an adherence to some foundation myth, but it's due to a recognition of the importance of one of the world's great philosophers and reformers.